The awakening in ruins. Darkness. She floated in it, lost, broken, confused. There was no sound, no movement, only an endless void pressing down on her. Then, pain. A deep, burning pain inside her chest, running through her limbs like fire. Her eyes flickered open. Blurry lights, shadows. A dull, metal scent filled the air. Something heavy pinned her down, cold and crushing. She tried to move but couldn't. Her arms felt stiff, her legs unresponsive. Her mind was foggy, full of missing pieces. Who was she? Where was she? A faint blue light blinked in her vision. System damage detected. Core integrity unstable. The robotic voice echoed in her head, distant and emotionless. She was damaged. She blinked again, forcing herself to focus. The world around her was ruined. Twisted metal beams stuck out from the ground like broken bones. Large chunks of concrete and shattered glass covered the area. The air smelled of dust and something burnt. She struggled to move her arm. It took all her strength just to lift it a little. Sparks flickered from the torn wires in her shoulder. A sharp pain shot through her, making her body seize. She gasped, her voice coming out in a static-filled whisper. She wasn't human. The realization hit her hard. Her fingers, metallic, sleek, with faded engravings, trembled as she examined them. She wasn't human, but she felt pain, fear, confusion. What am I? A sound. Distant footsteps, slow but steady. Someone was coming. Panic surged through her system. Were they friend or enemy? Was she being hunted? Her memory was broken, scattered. She didn't know if she had allies or if everyone wanted her dead. The footsteps grew louder. Gravel crunched under heavy boots. A shadow moved between the ruins. She held her breath. A figure appeared, stepping through the dust and debris. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn-out clothes covered in dirt. His dark hair was messy, his face lined with exhaustion. He carried a rifle over his back, a blade strapped to his leg. His gaze swept the area, sharp and focused, scanning for threats. Then his eyes landed on her. She braced herself, expecting an attack, but he didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he frowned, stepping closer. "You're alive." His voice was rough but not unkind. She tried to speak, but her vocal system crackled. He crouched beside her, studying her carefully. His hand reached out, brushing away debris from her body. His fingers hesitated over the damaged wires in her shoulder. "Dan, you're in bad shape." She flinched at his touch. He sighed. "Relax. I'm not here to kill you." His eyes were different from what she expected. They weren't filled with fear or disgust. They held something else. Curiosity, maybe even concern. He checked her wounds, shaking his head. "You look like you fell out of the sky." She didn't know if he was right. Maybe she did. Maybe that was why she was broken. The man stood up, looking around as if expecting someone else to appear. "What the hell are you doing here, all alone?" She didn't know. More footsteps. The man stiffened, his hand moving to his rifle. His expression hardened. "We can't stay here." Her systems flared a warning. Something was approaching. Something big. The ground trembled slightly, and a deep mechanical hum echoed through the ruins. The man swore under his breath. Scavenger droids. Not friendly. She struggled again, trying to sit up, but her body refused to work. Frustration and fear clawed at her. She couldn't stay here. She would die. The man seemed to realize her helplessness. He let out a sharp breath. All right. Guess I'm taking you with me." Before she could react, he reached down and lifted her off the ground. Pain flared through her body as he carried her over his shoulder. She wasn't light, and yet he moved quickly, navigating through the broken structures with ease. Behind them, something crashed. A low, robotic growl followed. The droids had arrived. The man tightened his grip on her. "Yeah, no time to waste. Let's go." She didn't know who he was or why he was helping her. But right now, she had no choice. She closed her eyes as he ran, the ruins fading behind them. She had woken up broken. But maybe, just maybe, this human would change everything. The human savior. She drifted between consciousness and darkness. Her system was failing, her body broken. Yet, something had changed. The cold, lifeless ruins were gone. She wasn't lying in the rubble anymore. She was moving. No, she was being carried. The sound of heavy footsteps filled her senses, crunching against gravel and debris. A rhythmic motion rocked her gently, a strange warmth pressing against her back. She wasn't alone. Then, a voice. "You better not die on me, machine." The voice was rough, human. It belonged to the man who had found her. She forced her eyes open, her vision blurred, static flickering across her HUD. She could barely make out the sky, dark and filled with swirling dust. Then his face came into view, a human. Strong features, unshaven, eyes sharp and cautious. He had a scar running down his jaw, a sign of someone who had seen too many fights. Awake? He didn't stop moving, his grip firm around her as he carried her over his shoulder. "Yeah, figured you wouldn't go down that easy." Her throat crackled as she tried to speak. The only sound that came out was static. "Save your energy, metal girl. You're barely holding together." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't just some machine. But the truth was, she didn't even know who she was. The ground beneath them vibrated. A low mechanical hum echoed through the air. The scavenger droids were close. The man muttered a curse and picked up his pace. He moved like a soldier, swift, efficient, always glancing over his shoulder. The ruined city around them was a maze of collapsed buildings and shattered highways. She tried to analyze their surroundings, but her system was still unstable. Data corrupted, memories missing. Only brief flashes remained. Running, hiding, fear. But fear of what? Who was she running from? The man ducked behind a rusted vehicle and peeked around the corner. He exhaled sharply. Damn it, they're everywhere. Her HUD flickered, finally stabilizing enough to scan the area. Shapes moved in the distance, tall, metallic figures with glowing red eyes, scanning the ruins for survivors. Hunters. Her system identified them instantly. A series tactical droids. Combat units. Extreme threat. Her fingers twitched. Instinctively, she tried to push herself up, but her arm barely responded. Sparks flew from her shoulder joint. The man glanced at her. "You're in no condition to fight. Stay down." She hated that he was right. The droids moved methodically, scanning every shadow, their weapons humming with lethal energy. If they found them, they wouldn't hesitate to kill. "We need to move," the man whispered. "I know a place." He adjusted his grip on her and sprinted toward a narrow alleyway. The world around them blurred as he moved, ducking behind broken walls, weaving through the ruins like he had done this 100 times before. The droid's footsteps echoed in the distance, but they didn't spot them. Not yet. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stopped. They were in a small, abandoned structure. An old shelter, half buried under debris. The man kicked open a rusted hatch in the ground and climbed down, carrying her with him. Darkness swallowed them whole as the hatch shut behind them. For the first time since she woke up, everything was silent. She was placed down gently onto a cold metal surface. Dim lights flickered on, revealing a small underground room filled with old tech and scattered supplies. The walls were lined with maps and notes written in human script. The man wiped sweat from his brow and exhaled. Safe, for now. He walked over to a nearby shelf, rummaging through a box. "All right, let's see if I can fix you." Fix her. Her system struggled to process his words. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't trying to destroy her or turn her in. He was trying to help. No human should be helping her. The fragmented memories in her mind whispered that she was dangerous, that she wasn't meant to be saved. But this man, He didn't seem to care. She tried to speak again. This time, her voice, though crackled and distorted, came through. Why? The man paused, glancing at her. Why? What? She struggled for the right words. Why? Help. Me. He let out a dry chuckle. What, you think I should have left you to rust out there? She didn't answer. The man sat down across from her, studying her carefully. You don't remember anything, do you? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she shook her head. His expression darkened, figured as much. He leaned back against the wall, running a hand through his messy hair. Listen, I don't know who you are or why those droids are after you. But I do know one thing. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and serious. You're not just some scrap metal. His words made something in her chest tighten. A strange feeling, something she couldn't name. He smirked slightly. Besides, I've got a soft spot for lost things. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure she could even trust him. But for now, she had no choice. As she sat in the dim light of the underground hideout, she realized something. She had woken up broken. But maybe, just maybe, this human could help her put the pieces back together. Restoring her piece by piece, a low hum filled the underground shelter, the sound of old power cells barely keeping the dim lights alive. The air was thick with dust and the scent of rusted metal. The space was cluttered, broken monitors, scattered tools, half-disassembled machinery. But despite the mess, it felt safe. For the first time since she had woken up, there was no immediate threat, no sound of metal footsteps hunting her down. Yet, she was still trapped. Not by walls, but by her own body. She sat on a metal workbench, her limbs stiff and unresponsive. Her left arm barely moved. Her legs felt heavy, and her internal systems flickered in and out of stability. The damage was extensive. She was supposed to be something more than this. A warrior, a protector, maybe something even greater. But now she was just a broken machine in the hands of a human she didn't know. The man, her rescuer, her captor, her only chance at survival, sat across from her, carefully examining her damaged circuits. His name was still a mystery. He hadn't given it, and she hadn't asked. His hands were steady, skilled, moving with precision as he worked on a small device. A power tool buzzed softly in his grip as he adjusted its settings. "All right," he muttered, glancing at her arm. "Let's see if I can fix you without making things worse." She didn't reply. Her vocal systems were still unstable, crackling with interference. He knelt beside her, inspecting the exposed wires running along her damaged shoulder. His fingers brushed against the metal plating, feeling the engravings that had once meant something. The markings were nearly unreadable now, worn down over time. "You're not just any machine, are you?" He frowned. "Whoever built you, they made you expensive." She didn't know how to respond. Was she expensive? Was she special? The truth was, she didn't even know who she was. The only thing she knew for certain was that she felt the pain in her circuits, the fear of the unknown, the strange tension in her core when this human looked at her like she was more than just a pile of broken metal. She wasn't just a machine. The thought startled her. The man sighed and reached for a bundle of wires on his worktable. "All right, let's start simple. I'll fix what I can." She watched him work. His hands were rough, calloused, but careful. He wasn't just some scavenger looking to strip her for parts. He wanted to repair her. The process was slow. He adjusted the internal wiring in her arm, reconnecting circuits and stabilizing the flow of energy. Each touch sent a sharp jolt through her body, painful but necessary. Her fingers twitched. A small success. He grinned. "There we go. That's a start." She flexed her hand slowly, testing its movement. The response was sluggish, but it was better than nothing. The man leaned back, satisfied. "Your systems are still a mess, but this should give you enough function to defend yourself if we get into trouble." Defend herself. The words felt familiar. A memory flickered. Not a clear image, just a feeling. Of battle, of standing between something and danger, of being built for a purpose. But what purpose? The thought slipped away before she could hold on to it. She looked at him, tilting her head slightly. Her voice was still weak, but she forced the words out. Why? Help me. The man exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. You're really stuck on that, huh? She didn't respond. She needed an answer. His expression hardened for a moment, but then his features softened. He set down the tool in his hand and leaned against the table. Because I know what it's like to be broken. She blinked. I used to be a soldier, he continued. ***, fought in wars that didn't mean anything. Lost people who did. When it was over, they threw me away like I was nothing. ***, his voice was steady, but she could hear the weight behind it. He gestured toward her. And now I find you, left to rot in the ruins like I once was. Maybe I just don't like seeing good things get tossed aside. Good things. That word made something in her system glitch. Was she good? She lowered her gaze to her hands. The metal fingers moved, slow but responsive. She didn't feel like something good. She felt like a broken weapon, an abandoned project that someone had wanted erased. The silence stretched between them. Finally, the man stood and stretched. You're stable for now. Get some rest. We move out in the morning. She tilted her head. Move out. Yeah, you're not safe here. Those droids weren't looking for just anyone. They were looking for you. His expression darkened. And I want to know why. So did she. She had woken up with no memory, no purpose, only broken pieces of a life she couldn't remember. But now she had a direction. And a human willing to help her. Even if she didn't know if she could trust him, he was the only thing standing between her and the unknown. For now, that was enough. She powered down her systems, letting herself drift into rest mode. Tomorrow, they would find the truth. Tomorrow, everything would change. Hunted and haunted. A faint hum echoed in her system, signaling the start of reboot protocols. She was waking up again. But this time, something was different. Her body felt stronger. The stiffness in her limbs had lessened, and when she shifted, the movement was smoother. The repairs had worked, at least partially. Her optics flickered online, adjusting to the dim glow of the underground hideout. The human, her reluctant savior, was standing by the entrance, his back turned to her as he scanned the outside ruins. His posture was tense, shoulders stiff, as if he expected something, or someone, to be lurking in the darkness beyond. She sat up slowly, testing her joints. Her fingers flexed properly now. She rotated her wrist, feeling the whir of mechanics settling into place. She was still damaged, but she was no longer helpless. The human turned at the sound of her movement. His sharp gaze locked onto hers. You're awake. Good. She analyzed his tone, calm, but laced with urgency. Something was wrong. She swung her legs off the table, but when she tried to stand, her balance wavered. The human stepped forward instinctively, catching her before she could collapse. Easy, metal girl. You're not at full power yet. She gritted her teeth, frustration buzzing in her circuits. She hated this. Feeling weak, feeling lost. But she didn't resist when he steadied her, holding her up as she adjusted. His grip was firm, his warmth an odd contrast against the cold metal of her body. She didn't understand him. Why was he helping her? Why was he still here? Most would have left her to rust. We need to move, he said, pulling back once she had her footing. They're still looking for you. She stiffened. The droids. He nodded grimly. Yeah. And they're getting closer. Her system flared a silent warning. A scan of the underground hideout revealed subtle vibrations in the walls. Faint, but growing. Something above them was moving. Something hunting. She took a step forward, this time steady. Then we leave. Now. The man smirked. Good to see you're on board. He grabbed a small bag from the corner, checking his weapons, a rifle, a blade, a few grenades. He was prepared for war. She wondered how many battles he had fought, how many times he had survived against the odds. More importantly, would he survive this? She followed him as he climbed a rusted metal ladder leading to the surface. When they emerged from the underground shelter, the ruins stretched before them in eerie silence. The city was long dead, skyscrapers torn apart, streets cracked and covered in dust, vehicles frozen in place as if time had abandoned them. And yet, something still moved in the shadows. She could feel it. The human led the way, his steps careful but quick. They weaved through the broken buildings, staying low, avoiding open spaces. Every few minutes, he would glance back at her as if making sure she was still there. It was strange. No one had ever looked for her before. She didn't remember much, but that feeling, she was certain of. Then she heard it. A low, mechanical growl. The human cursed under his breath. They're close. She turned, scanning the surroundings. Her HUD pinpointed movement in the distance. 3 humanoid figures stepping through the ruins. Their eyes glowed red. A series tactical droids. Her system reacted instantly, identifying them, marking them as threats. But this time, something new appeared in her diagnostics. A name. Unit 7X priority target. Eliminate on sight. Her breath caught in her throat. They weren't just looking for her. They wanted her dead. She clenched her fists, feeling power hum beneath her skin. Even in her weakened state, she could fight. She had to. But before she could make a move, the human grabbed her wrist and yanked her into cover behind a collapsed wall. Not yet, he whispered. We don't fight unless we have to. Her system disagreed. She was built to fight. But she didn't argue. She followed his lead as they maneuvered through the ruins, staying just out of sight of the droids. They moved like predators, scanning every inch of the wreckage, their weapons humming with stored energy. One wrong step, and it would be over. They slipped into an abandoned building, the human leading her through the wreckage. The walls were cracked, the floor littered with broken glass. The place had once been a home, but now it was nothing more than a skeleton of the past. He pressed against the wall, listening as the droids passed by outside. Silence. Then, a flicker of movement. Before she could react, a mechanical claw smashed through the window, grabbing the human by the shoulder and yanking him backward. She moved without thinking. Her body sprang into action, broken parts and all. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the ground and swung it with all her strength. Cracky. The impact sent the droid staggering back, its grip loosening. The human dropped to the ground, rolling away as she lunged forward. Her system roared to life, combat protocols activating, instincts she didn't remember having guiding her movements. She dodged the droid's next attack, twisting around as she drove the pipe straight into its glowing red eye. Sparks flew. The droid convulsed, circuits frying, before it collapsed in a heap of metal. She turned. The other 2 droids had heard the commotion. They were coming. Move, the human shouted. They ran. Through the ruins, over fallen beams, down crumbling staircases, they ran. The droids pursued, their movements unnervingly fast. Plasma shots whizzed past them, burning holes into the ground. Then, ahead, she saw it. A collapsed highway bridge leading into the open wasteland beyond. The only way out. The human pointed. We jump. It was a long fall. Too high for him. But not for her. She turned to him. I can carry you. He hesitated. Then, he nodded. She grabbed him without another word, tightening her grip around his waist as she launched forward, leaping into the air. For a moment, they were weightless. Then, impact. She landed hard, metal joints absorbing the shock. The human gasped as they rolled onto solid ground. Behind them, the droid skidded to a halt at the edge of the ruined bridge. They had escaped. For now. The human groaned, pushing himself up. He looked at her with something different in his eyes. Not fear, not distrust. Something else. That was insane, he muttered. But thanks. She simply nodded. She had saved him. And for the first time she realized she wanted to. They weren't just running anymore. They were surviving. Together. And the people hunting her. They had made a mistake. Because she wasn't going to die here. She was going to find out who she was. And when she did, she would make them pay. Escape and revelation. The world outside the ruined city was eerily silent. For the first time since she had woken up, she wasn't surrounded by collapsing buildings, broken metal, and the hum of hunting droids. The wasteland stretched before them, vast, desolate, and endless. The sky, once choked with dust and smoke, now revealed a thin strip of distant stars breaking through the murky clouds. They had made it out, but they were far from safe. She and the human sat near the remains of an old transport vehicle, half buried in the dirt. He was catching his breath, rubbing his bruised shoulder from where the droid had grabbed him. She, on the other hand, was scanning the horizon, her systems still on high alert. They wouldn't stop hunting her. She didn't know why. Not yet. But she would. The human exhaled heavily, tilting his head back against the rusted metal frame of the transport. Hell of a night. She looked at him, expression unreadable. You are injured. He let out a dry laugh. Yeah, well, nothing I can't handle. He flexed his fingers, testing the sore muscles. You, on the other hand, just fought off 3 droids like it was a warm-up. She looked down at her hands. The metal fingers twitched, stained with scratches and dust from the fight. She had moved on instinct, reacting, adapting, fighting like she had done it 1,000 times before. Because she had. She knew it, even if she didn't remember. Her mind was fractured, memories flickering like static across a broken screen. She had no past, only pieces of something larger, a shadow of a purpose she no longer understood. The human studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. You still don't remember anything, do you? She hesitated. No. He ran a hand through his messy hair, frowning. That symbol on your arm, the one under all those scratches, it's not just military tech. She looked down at the faint engravings near her shoulder. The markings were damaged, unreadable to her. What does it mean? She asked. The human hesitated. Then, finally, he spoke. It means you weren't just built for war. She felt something shift inside her at those words. He turned, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You weren't made to be a soldier, metal girl. You were made for something bigger. Bigger. The word echoed through her mind, tangled in the fractured remains of her missing past. She had been built for something. But what? And why did someone want her dead? The human pulled out a small handheld scanner from his pack. He had swiped it from an abandoned outpost long ago. Old world tech, barely functioning, but still useful. Let's see if we can dig a little deeper. He pointed it at her arm, activating a low-frequency scan. A faint blue light flickered across her plating, reading the worn engravings. A moment later, the screen on the scanner lit up. The human's eyes widened. No way. This can't be right. She leaned forward. What does it say? He turned the screen toward her. A name flashed across it. A designation. Project AEGS. Her systems locked. Something inside her clicked. She knew that name. Not fully, not completely, but it wasn't just a label. It was something deeper, something buried inside her, a part of who she was. Aegis. The word triggered a flood of fragmented images. A laboratory. Bright, stereo lights. Voices arguing in the distance. A sense of urgency. A mission. And then, pain. A shutdown. Darkness. She gasped, her fingers clutching her head as her system glitched, overwhelming her senses with broken memories. The human grabbed her shoulders. Hey, breathe. Focus. She forced herself to stabilize, pushing through the static. When she looked up, her voice was quiet, but certain. I know that name. The human exhaled. Good, because if you want answers, that's where we start. She stared at the scanner, the words still glowing on the screen. Project Aegis. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but she knew one thing. Someone had tried to erase her, and now she was going to find out why. No more running. It was time to fight back. The truth unveiled. The wasteland stretched out before them, endless and silent. The human, her only ally, led the way, his steps steady despite the uncertainty ahead. She followed, her mind still buzzing with the revelation from the scanner. Project Aegis. The name had ignited something inside her, something old and deeply buried. It wasn't just a designation. It was her past. Now she needed to find out what it meant. The journey to the facility. The human, who still hadn't told her his name, had spent hours leading them through the abandoned roads, avoiding open areas, always scanning for threats. The droids were still out there. They wouldn't stop hunting her. She was marked for deletion. But why? As they traveled, she observed him. His survival instincts were sharp, his movements calculated. He had fought before. He had lost before. But he had lived. And now he was helping her live too. How do you know where we're going? She asked, breaking the long silence between them. He smirked but didn't stop walking. I don't, but I know where to start. He held up a battered tablet, its cracked screen flickering with maps and old data logs. Military records. This wasteland used to be full of research facilities. Black sites. Places that weren't supposed to exist. If this Project Aegis is real, there's only one place that makes sense. He tapped a blinking point on the map. Site 17. The last operational lab before everything fell apart. Her system processed the information. A facility. A place where she might have been created. A place that held answers. Her fingers twitched. How far? He exhaled. A day's walk, if we don't run into trouble. They both knew that was unlikely. Memories in the dark. That night, they took shelter in the remains of an old bunker. The walls were cracked, the ceiling unstable, but it provided cover. She didn't sleep. She didn't need to. But the human did. She watched him from the corner of the room as he rested. His breathing was slow, steady, his fingers twitching occasionally, as if reliving old battles in his sleep. Her own system remained alert, scanning the surroundings. But beneath the surface, something else stirred. A memory. She closed her eyes, letting the fragments surface. A laboratory. White walls, glowing screens. A voice, distant yet familiar. You are more than a weapon. The voice belonged to a woman. Strong, but kind. A scientist, perhaps. Another memory flickered. Alarms blaring. Red warning lights flashing. Chaos. Shadows moving, shouting. Shut it down. They can't know she exists. Pain. A searing, unbearable pain. And then, nothing. Her optics snapped open. She clenched her fists. The memory was incomplete, but the message was clear. She wasn't supposed to be found. Someone had tried to erase her. And now she was about to uncover what they had tried to bury. Arrival at Site 17. By dawn, they reached the facility. It was massive, its structure half buried under layers of dust and debris. The entrance was collapsed, the doors bent inward as if something had forced its way in, or out. The human cursed under his breath. Whatever happened here, it wasn't pretty. She stepped forward, scanning the ruins. Her systems detected faint power signatures, weak but still active. There was something inside. We need to go in, she said. The human didn't argue. Yeah, but stay sharp. They moved cautiously, slipping through a gap in the broken wall. The inside was worse than the exterior. Burned-out corridors, shattered glass, flickering emergency lights casting eerie shadows. It felt familiar. She had been here before. She led the way, following the weak power signals deeper into the facility. Every step brought flashes of memory. A hallway she had walked before, a room where she had stood, voices whispering about something bigger than herself. Finally, they reached a central chamber. The human let out a low whistle. Well, this is new. In the center of the room stood a massive containment pod, its surface covered in dust, but still intact. Next to it, a terminal blinked weakly, barely holding on to life. She approached it, her fingers brushing against the old controls. Her system automatically linked to it, bypassing the ancient security. The screen flickered. Pro GCT, AEGS, Final, ENTRO. A video file loaded. The human stepped closer, watching as the screen played a recording. A woman appeared, the same voice from her memory. If you are seeing this, it means they found you. Her own body tensed. The woman looked tired, her lab coat stained, her expression filled with urgency. You are not a weapon. You were never meant to be one. We built you to protect, not to destroy. But when they realized your potential, they turned against you. They ordered your termination. We couldn't let that happen. The woman glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to burst in. We wiped your memory to keep you safe. But if you've made it this far, then you deserve to know the truth. The screen glitched. The video distorted. Then the final words came through. You are the last of your kind. And if they find you, they will stop at nothing to finish what they started. The recording ended. Silence filled the room. She stared at the screen, the words echoing in her system. She was the last. The human exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Well, that explains a lot. She turned to him. They will come for me. He met her gaze. Yeah, but they'll have to go through me first. For the first time since waking up, she felt something more than confusion, more than fear. Determination. They had erased her past. Now she would reclaim her future. No more hiding. No more running. If they wanted to finish what they started, she would make sure they failed. The battle begins. Then, chaos. The droids fired first. Plasma bolts ripped through the air, slamming into the facility walls, sending debris flying. She moved, faster than before, faster than she had ever moved. She was built for this. Her body blurred into motion, dodging between the gunfire. She lunged forward, grabbing the closest droid and tearing its arm clean off. Sparks erupted as it collapsed. The human fired, his rifle sending precise shots through the chaos. One droid went down, then another. But they kept coming. She leaped over cover, grabbing a fallen droid's weapon midair, flipping it in her hands. Adapt. Overcome. Fight. She fired. The plasma blast tore through two enemies in a single shot. They weren't just fighting anymore. They were winning. Face to face with